The next chart we're going to learn to use is the line chart. We'll select Add a Chart, Line Chart, and we'll place it right here. What is a line chart generally used for? Line charts are used to relate several metrics against a dimension, just like we did with a table. But here we're going to do it in a more graphical way. Let's look at something very important and quite helpful: learning to manage the axes in line charts. Give me a moment and I'll explain everything to you. For now, let's change the metrics and dimensions that come by default. I will change to the age dimension. Additionally, I will select the metric of views. I think this is a good metric, and I want it to be delivered in ascending order. Okay, so here we can see a line of age ranges, organized by the number of views from lowest to highest. What's interesting about using line charts is that we can add more metrics. For this case, I will add the bounce rate. And this is where the chart will start to make sense. Let's enlarge this chart, and we'll notice something. Notice that graphically, if I'm not very detail-oriented, I see that it only shows me the blue line corresponding to the views part. However, the bounce rate is being shown, but it's very low on the axis. Why does this happen? Because the bounce rate is a percentage. It's a rate. So if I relate it on the same axis as the views, it will seem to be very low due to the disproportion between one metric and another. We don't want to give that impression. So what we're going to do is configure the axes of the line charts. We'll go to the Style section. Notice that it shows us the series we have, which correspond to the metrics we've added to the chart. So we will have Series 1, which in this case are the views. What interests us here is, in the Axis section, to assign the axis on which we want our metric to be displayed. I want to manage it on the left axis. But for Series 2, which corresponds to the bounce rate, I don't want it to be shown on the same axis as the views. I want to move it to the other axis so it can have its own proportion. So I'll select the right axis. Now, look how things change. Notice that the bounce rate now has its own axis and is no longer displayed as a horizontal line perpendicular to the x-axis. It now has its own y-axis scale. It can now be displayed in a slightly easier and more graphical way, and we can see how it evolves. What's interesting about all this? Here we can have the relationship of one dimension over two variables and see how it acts across different categories. For example, we could know what happened in the age range of 35 to 44 years or in the 18 to 24 age range. We could continue adding more metrics, as long as they meet these conditions, that they are on one of the axis proportions. Let's add another metric, new users. Notice that although they are very close, the x-axis added them correctly and is showing them on the right axis. Let's change this new users metric for one that is a bit higher. I'll take the sessions. And look how the information is displayed and how it aligns with an axis that goes along with the same proportion in the data scale. What's interesting about these line charts is that we can also play with combined charts. So I'm going to switch to a variation of the same. I don't want just a line chart anymore. Now, I want to see another variation. I'll go to Add a Chart, and in the Line Chart section, I'll select the Combo Chart. So I'll add it right here. Let's change the metrics and dimensions it comes with by default. I'll take the same ones from the previous example. So, for this case, I'll take age. I'll change this metric to views. And I'll also add my bounce rate. Let's change the style, and here we'll be able to select what I want to display as a line and what I want to display as a bar. I want the views to be shown as bars. We see that Series 1, which is the views, is being displayed as a line. I don't want it to show as a line. I want it to show as a bar, as we had said. In addition to that, I want its axis to be the left one. On the other hand, for Series 2, which is the bounce rate, I want it to be displayed on the right axis, and I don't want it to be a bar. I want it to be a line. So I can see how the different categories, in this case the ages, display the views. Additionally, we see how the line corresponding to the bounce rate crosses them. These charts are useful for making quick readings. And, as I mentioned at the beginning, for combining different metrics, we wish to add to a certain dimension. Let's look at another variation of this type of chart. Within the line charts, we'll also see the stacked combo chart. What is this going to be used for? We'll see that in a moment. First, let's change all the metrics and dimensions we have here. I'm going to change this dimension to device brand. And I'll change these metrics. I want to see the number of active users. And I also want to see the number of new users. And I also want to see the bounce rate. Done. Let's change how this chart looks so you can understand how it works. Similar to how we've been working, let's go to the Style section. So for Series 1, which corresponds to the active users, I want it to be a bar. For Series 2, which corresponds to new users, I'll also view it as a bar. And for Series 3, corresponding to the bounce rate, I want it to take the form of a line. Additionally, I'll configure it to be displayed on the right axis. Done, our chart is now configured. Now, how should I read this chart? Notice that in the stacked bar charts, what it shows me is the number of active users and the number of new users. So, notice that in a single bar, it's showing me the total number of users, since it sums both the active users and the new users. It's also showing me the bounce rate on the line against the device brand. If we want to see it in a slightly easier way, let's change the device brand to the gender dimension. And we'll change it. Here we can see it more clearly. Notice that in the unknown gender category, the number of active users is 54,155, new users 52,125, and the bounce rate is 51.62%. When you combine these bars, or decide which metric to use with bars, you need to ensure that these metrics are proportional and belong to a common category. In this case, new users and active users show us the total users. See you in the next class.